Good afternoon. It is Thursday, right? Hi, it's Tuesday, October 6th, and we're going to continue our discussion about variables and move into putting variables together into claims of relationships between variables. If you were asked the most simple description of what you are learning in this class, it is identifying claims about relationships between variables. That's what we're focusing on. That's a lot of what, that would be a really easy way of summing up a lot of research. We covered this slide, yes? So we were talking about that within the social sciences, there are three main ways that we go about gathering our variables, that we go about measuring our variables. We can observe behavior. So we can observe people or other animal actions. We can observe performance on a test where there are right answers. We can observe archives where your behavior has produced some record, and we can go and look at that record. We can ask you to tell us things. We love to do that when it's about attitudes and beliefs and feelings. What better way to get at, are you happy today, than to just plain up ask you, are you happy today? We can also ask about memories. But we always need to then know that that might not be the best way, that might not be particularly accurate. Where you are completely aware of how you feel right now, and you may or may not tell me, you really might not remember things that you've done in the past. And I'm making a point about this because we will be discussing how we critique these variables, and quite often we end up having to ask about behaviors, like, how much did you eat yesterday? So I'm asking you, what do you remember eating yesterday? Much cleaner way of doing that would have been to go and watch you eat, right? To observe that behavior. But we often end up using self-report because it's quick and easy. And so in the middle part of the class, we'll talk a lot about how we conduct observations and how we conduct self-reports, how we draft those in order to maximize their accuracy. We also do quite some physiological monitoring where we are looking at how sweaty your palms are getting in response to anxiety or something, or we're monitoring your brain waves or your sleep patterns. So those are the three main ways that we're going to be gathering data, that we're going to be measuring the variables. Did we get to this slide? I don't think so. Okay, good. All right. But you've been thinking about this because you've been working on your homework, right? Is that better? Okay. Is that still okay? All right. So when we measure our variables, sometimes we're measuring them in categories. We're measuring them categorically, where there are different levels that are grouped. They're words, they differ in quality or kind, that they are mutually exclusive categories. You're either in one category or you're in a different category. Or we measure them continuously, where there's the difference is in quantity or in amount, and there's an order. And they go along a continuum, and they go along a number line, and you can immediately see what's bigger and what's smaller, that there is an inherent magnitude. So they're values. So we either have levels of variables. Categorical variables have levels that are words, that are labels. Continuous variables have values. You say, I'm measuring this in beats per minute. I'm measuring this in days. I'm measuring this in hours. I'm measuring this in, whatever your scale or values are. We can always take a continuously measured variable and then chop it into categories and group it. We can't go the other way. So let's get out our clickers and practice that. If I am interested in your household living arrangement and I ask you to respond self-report data like this, have I asked you a categorical variable or a continuous variable? Do you see I'm not asking you actually how you live? If I've defined household living arrangement as this, is that categorical or continuous? You see the question? All right, you see the question. I've got almost 200 of you answered. Okay. Great. And 95% of you are recognizing that that is absolutely categorical, that there are different groups, they are mutually exclusive, they're labels, words, the words that are those different categories. How about if I ask you about your household living arrangement and say, how many people, including yourself, live in your house? Have I measured it categorically or continuously in this case? Great. I see everyone answering. And again, we're at about 95% who are recognizing that that is continuous. Those are numbers along a number line, that there is an inherent order, that you can look at 11 and know that it is more than 4. There are a few of you who are saying this is categorical, and I'm hoping that it's because you are so smart, you are overthinking it to the point of saying, I can't answer 4.3. Therefore, it's not truly continuous. And indeed, in this case, these are discrete numbers. You have to choose a 1 or a 2 or a 3. But for the purpose of this class, we're going to treat that as we're going to lump truly continuous and discretely continuous together as just continuous and contrast that with categories. Could I say the average number of people in this, of this household living arrangement? Could I take your data and average it? Then that's a number, right? That's continuous. So, whereas I couldn't tell you the average of how, if you live with sharing finances and not sharing finances. So, we're going to certainly treat this as categorical, as continuous. This as continuous, continuum. It's numbers along a line. In people, the scale or the values would be in number of people. Yes? Oh, to change the channel to AA, I think you push the blue button and then you type AA. Is that right? So when we've got variables in research, we've been talking about the claims or the relationships between variables. Are you enjoying the textbook? I think the textbook's really well written, really succinct. I try to follow the textbook very closely. And I don't have time in only 3 hours a week, particularly when I forget like the first 3 days of the week and think it's Thursday already. I don't have the time in lecture to go through all of the details. And so it's, I think, very important that you are reading along in the textbook and are reinforcing the things that I'm emphasizing with the other details. Yeah? So this week's homework is due on Wednesday. That did happen a little bit last week, that we didn't quite get all of the work done. The reason I do that, honestly, is so that the people who need to drop in the first 10 days know that they have to drop in the first 10 days, that there's something due, and that they have an idea of the scope. The next homework will be due next Wednesday, and it will cover this Thursday's lecture and next Tuesday's lecture. And then next Thursday is the first exam, yeah. And then we will go into a pattern of it due on Monday, so you'll have Tuesday, Thursday, and then the homework due Mondays. Okay. I know that some of this, yes, was that you'll need this in order to do the homework this week. I think that we will get through all of that today. Okay? I forgot to ask if there are any other administrative questions at the beginning, didn't I? I was so confused about the day of the week and the document camera not being plugged in. Administrative questions? Uh-huh. Oh, okay. So on the worksheets, whenever you lose points, there's a comment, a little code that's a letter and a number. And there should have been an email that's sent out saying, go look in the worksheet common penalties resources for the key to match those. And if it hasn't been sent out yet, we will get it sent out right away. So there's a key, a legend that tells you what that common penalty is. Okay, if we haven't posted it yet, we'll be sure to get that out. I know we have it all ready to go. It just not have been sent out yet. Any other administrative questions? So you saw your homework from last week. It's graded. You're working on the homework that's due tomorrow. Yes? Oh, you had to ask. Okay, so iClicker grades. All the data is safe. All of your responses are safe. I promise you, I have it all. It's all safe. It's just not matching to your names yet. And it's not just me. Apparently, it's like across campus. It's a new version of the software, and the technical support guys are working on it, and they're going to figure out how to match you to your performance. Right now, I've got your Clicker ID and your performance, but I don't have your Clicker ID matched to your student ID. But we will get it sorted out. Okay, I promise. All right. Moving right along, let's get started with the material. Oh, another question. Yes, way in the back. Oh my goodness, can you shout? Oh my goodness, I forgot. Okay, I will. If I don't get them up today, send me a nice email saying, just a reminder that you were going to do this. I really apologize. A nice reminder, a little kick, goes a long way. I will get those up. All right. Moving right along. Let's talk about variables in research. So I was bringing up the book because your book really frames the material about these three different levels of claims: the frequency claims, the associative claims, and the causal claims. And then also uses the frame of validity, which we're going to get to today as well. So in research, when we're looking at variables, we can be making associative claims. I wonder if X is related to Y. In this case, X is the predictor variable. We are wondering if X predicts some characteristic in Y, or some change in Y. And it could be a pre-existing characteristic used to group the participants. And Y is the outcome variable. It's the response. It's what we're measuring. In causal claims, we're asking what is the effect of X on Y. X is still the predictor variable, but it is also an independent variable. An independent variable is a subset of predictor variables. And we call them independent because they are independent of everything else. They are under the researcher's control. They are manipulated. So if I was to take 300 students and randomly assign you to having, I don't know, your homework due on Wednesdays or your homework due on Mondays, I would be manipulating that, and it wouldn't be anything about you that was put you in one group or the other. So that variable would be independent. And then y is the outcome variable. It is the dependent variable. We call it the dependent variable because we sure hope that it depends on the level of the independent variable. So that's, again, that outcome, that response to measured. So we'll be using the words predictor variable and outcome variable. Those are the larger categories. When we're talking about causal claims and experiments, we will then start using the words independent variable and dependent variable. But you know that those are subsets. So predictor variables fall into a number of different groups. They can be participant variables. Participant variables are pre-existing characteristics. They're the pesky individual differences that the participants walk through the door with. Can you think of some participant variables? Gender, age, height, weight, intelligence, education, choices, so things that the participants just walk through the door with, all of the individual differences. We're never going to be able to control those. We're never going to be able to assign you to be a different age, or to assign you to be a different ethnicity, or a different height, or a different... We can't do it. So these are pre-existing conditions, and we can group you according to the level or value of that, and look at, I wonder if X is related to Y. We can look at associative claims, but we will never be able to pull those under our control. So when we're talking about predictor variables, sometimes they are participant variables, and sometimes they can be truly independent variables that are manipulated, that are under the experimenter's control, where I can assign this group to this level and another group to a different level, and manipulate that and make it independent of anything else that is going on, anything else that you've walked in the door with. Let's practice this a little bit. Oh my goodness, it's so orange, green. All right. So if we want to know this question, what is the most effective therapeutic approach to treat depression? Are you aware, so from Psych 1, what are some therapeutic approaches that might be used to treat depression? So antidepressant meds, so talk therapy. Can I call that cognitive behavior therapy? Is that the same? Okay. So exercise, okay, all right, so let's start with those three. So what's the most effective therapeutic approach to treat depression? There are two variables listed there. What's one of them? The therapy, or the therapeutic approach, or the treatment, or the, let's call it therapy. What are its levels or values? So we've generated three, right? Meds, cognitive behavior therapy, and exercise. Is that continuous or categorical, the way we've just defined it? Categorical, yep. What's another variable? So, okay, so extent of depression. Boy, how might we operationally define that? How might we measure that? Survey, just asking you how you're doing, how you're feeling, how optimistic are you feeling, how, so depression, something that you would be aware of and you would be able to self-report about that. So if I ask you, let's say I ask you 10 questions and you answer 1 to 5 on each of them, I cry all the time, strongly agree to strongly disagree, that sort of questions. And then added that up. So you could have a score of 10 to a score of 50, with 50 being you're really depressed and 10 being you're really not depressed. Does that make sense? So is that continuous or categorical? That is continuous. And it's, you know, on this depression scale that we've just made up here. And we have standardized ones that smart people have made up. Which is the predictor? Which is the outcome? Which is the predictor? Therapy. So the outcome is your depression. We're wanting to know, does the type of therapy influence the amount of depression? Is the predictor variable a pre-existing characteristic, or is it manipulated? Could it be under our control? So manipulated, yes, that we could, if we really wanted to know this, we would take 100 people who were depressed, and we would assign 33 1/3 of them to one group, or let's take 300 people. That'll be easy. We'll take 300 people who are depressed and assign 100 people to go to take depression meds, and 100 people to go to talk therapy, and 100 people to work out and do some exercise. And then we'd come back in 6 months and measure how much has their depression changed. And so we would be in charge of what type of therapy they got. If we wanted to know which sorts of therapies were, you know, the differing effectiveness of therapies. How about this one? Do boys and girls play in the same size groups of friends? What's one of the variables you hear there? Gender. Love it. I'm so glad that you backed up and you gave me an umbrella term that goes over both of the levels. Because the label is not boy-girl. It is, you need to back up and give me an umbrella term. So the variable is gender. What are its levels or values? So boys, girls. Is that continuous or categorical? What's another variable? Yeah, so group size. How do you expect that that's going to be measured? So number of kids, right? And is that continuous or categorical? Continuous. Which is the predictor? Gender. Outcome is group size. Is the predictor pre-existing or is it manipulated? Pre-existing. What did we call those pre-existing characteristics? Participant variables. Got the picture? Got the gist? Great. Go ahead and prove it to me. If I am interested in your anxiety level and I say I'm going to define anxiety, my operational anxiety is I'm going to give you a test that has no correct answers and you are going to fail it because I've designed it so that it has no correct answers. Is that something that I can manipulate, or is that something that you walk through the door with? Can you hear the difference there? So the idea here would be, if I wanted to see how you act when you are at different levels of anxiety, I would need a way to manipulate your anxiety level. And one way to manipulate your anxiety level might be to put you in a situation where there are no right answers on a test. That would be very frustrating and stressful. And so that would be manipulated and under my control. I can decide which participants go to which group. How about if I decided to operationally define anxiety as the number of recent life stressors that you have experienced? If you've recently moved, if you've recently had a significant loss, is that something that I can manipulate? Or is that something that is a participant variable that you guys would walk through the door with, that the participants would walk through the door with? All right. I'm seeing most of you there, and 98% of you recognize that It would not be ethical to make you move or make you have a significant loss. And so that's a participant variable. That's something that you walk through the door with. These are two just different ways that we could conceptualize anxiety, that we could operationalize anxiety, that we could define anxiety. Yeah. So whether or not we can manipulate your anxiety depends completely on how we have defined it, the operational definition. So if I want to say, I wonder if sort of a chronic anxiety state because you've recently moved or you've recently experienced a loss, or if that's going to influence your optimism about the future, then I am only looking at an associative claim. If I want to say, I wonder if I kind of stress you out and frustrate you just in a little short time frame, just over 15 minutes, would that influence your outlook on life? Then I would be defining it. I could define anxiety in a way that I could manipulate it. Let's look at another example. So if I say I'm interested in your athletic talent, and I'm going to define your athletic talent as just your natural athleticism. How athletic are you? Is that something that I can manipulate, or is that something that is a participant variable that you walk through the door with? I'm seeing you all there, and you're all agreeing that that is a participant variable. However, if I say I'm interested in athletic talent, and I'm going to define athletic talent by the amount of training and practice you receive, then I am bringing that under my control. I'm now defining it in a way where I could manipulate it. So the way you define your variables will influence whether they're participant variables or whether they're independent variables. Great. All right. So just to sum that up, we've got predictor variables, because I love saying things like 3 or 4 times. We've got participant variables that are the pre-existing characteristics, those pesky individual differences. They're measured, they're not manipulated. Or the predictor variable can be an independent variable that can be manipulated, can be under the experimenter control. And then we've got our outcome variables. Our outcome variables are always measured. We're measuring did our predictor variable have an effect on our outcome variable? When we measure them, we might choose to observe behaviors. We might choose to ask about people's opinions or feelings or preferences or memories. We might monitor physiological responses. And those are our outcome variables. Questions on variables? Yes? Uh-huh. Yep. So either predictor variables or outcome variables can be either continuous or categorical. And if a variable is measured categorically, then you need to tell me what the levels are. If the variable is measured continuously, then you need to tell me what the values are. What's the scale? What is it measured in number of people? Is it measured in hours? Is it measured in... Okay? So let's move on and talk about claims, the relationships between variables. Okay, so there's like buzzing, right? Let's see if I go, is that better? Did that change it at all? So we're going to talk about association claims, and we're going to talk about causal claims. We talked about this before. You saw this like the first day, where we are sometimes just describing behavior. We're making frequency claims. We're sometimes trying to just identify relationships that would allow us to predict behavior. Those are association claims. The relationships can have different strengths, and that would lead to different degrees of confidence in our ability to predict. And then we can try to strive towards explaining behavior and really understanding cause and effect relationships. And those are the causal claims. So when we talk about relationships between variables, let me tell you about a couple of different types of relationships. There can be a positive linear relationship. As one variable goes up, so does the other variable. So as your attendance at class goes up, I imagine your grade goes up. As your attendance in class goes down, what happens to your grade? Your grade also goes down. They go up together, they go down together. That is a positive linear relationship. A negative linear relationship, as one goes up, the other goes down. So the hours you spend partying goes up, your GPA goes down. The number of hours you spend partying goes down, your GPA goes up. So those are a negative linear relationship. As one goes up, the other goes down. They go up and down opposite of each other. There are also curvilinear relationships. We won't discuss those very much in here, but be aware that they exist. Or perhaps there's no relationship. Perhaps there's no relationship between these two variables. One does not predict the other. Let's take a look at what those look like. So here is a positive linear relationship. And in this case, this example is how quickly someone is talking to you and how much your attitude changes. So have you been like accosted by people on the, outside the supermarket saying, do you have a minute to talk about animal rights? How quickly are they talking to you? Are they talking to you really quickly and trying to change your mind? So it turns out that as they speak faster, we actually do experience more of an attitude change. So each of these dots represents a single participant. So this participant was being spoken to very fast and ended up with a lot of attitude change. This participant was being spoken to, well, let's look at this one. This one was being spoken to sort of a moderate rate, ended up with a moderate amount of attitude change. This participant was being spoken to very slowly and ended up with quite a low attitude change. Then there's this line of best fit that shows us the relationship there, and that relationship is positive. It's going as this scale increases, it is going up, as opposed to the negative relationship. As this scale increases, it is decreasing. Okay? So they're increasing together and they're decreasing together. This is a negative linear relationship here, and you can see the slope of the line is opposite. It has a negative slope. So in this case, it's group size from a small group to a large size and the amount of noise each individual makes. So it turns out if we're in a small group, each individual makes more noise. If we're in a large group, each individual makes less noise. And again, each of these black dots represents a single participant, which each participant has an amount of noise, a group size, and an amount of noise they were making. So that's a positive relationship and a negative relationship. A curvilinear relationship might look like this, where at different levels of the scale, looks like there's a bit of a positive relationship here, but then at another level of the scale, there's actually a negative relationship. So at different areas on the scale, the relationship changes. And then this one's showing no relationship at all. So this is the amount of crowding and the performance level, and the participants are just all over the place. In the positive relationship and the negative relationship, if I said, here's the next participant, they have been assigned to the slow speech rate, can you predict what their attitude change is going to be? Yeah, it's going to be low, right? But here, if I say they're in the low crowding, you're like, yeah, that gives me no information whatsoever. My best guess is just going to be the average. You see how this line is just flat? It's just flat at the average. This is the average performance level for this group. And that would be my best guess, is that everyone's roughly average. And that knowing the amount of crowding is giving you no additional information. You aren't able to predict performance level from the amount of crowding. Let's practice those. So these are 3 examples from your book. All right. So what's this one? Facebook users get worse grades in college. What's my predictor variable? So Facebook use from low to high. And what's my outcome variable? Your grades from low to high. And what's the pattern that's showing? Facebook users get worse grades. As Facebook use goes up, grades go down. So it's a negative. So we would expect to see a relationship like that. How about OMG, texting and IMing doesn't affect spelling? What's our predictor variable? Texting, yep. And again, we're going to go from low to high. What's our outcome variable? Spelling. From low to high. And what's the relationship? No relationship. So it doesn't matter if you text or not. There's no relationship between how much you're texting and how good your spelling is. Say it again. Texting and IM doesn't affect spelling. Do you hear it? So Facebook users get worse grades in college. That's showing that there is a relationship that as Facebook goes up, grades go down. Texting and IMing doesn't affect spelling. So it doesn't matter if you've got low texting or high texting. We would expect to see the participants all over the map. Whereas with this, we would expect to see the participants showing that sort of pattern. So you're a good speller or you're a bad speller, it has no relationship to how much you're texting. Because they're not related. Let's look at a third one. Mother's heartburn means a hairy newborn. What's the predictor variable there? Probably. So there's really not a clear predictor. But heartburn's what you'd see first, isn't it? So we'd have heartburn from low to high, and newborn hairiness from low to high. And what's the what's the relationship? As heartburn increases, the hairiness increases. That's a positive relationship. So these aren't very likely to be directly related, right? It's not that you've got heartburn that causes your newborn or your fetus to grow hair. And it's not that your fetus has got hair that would cause the heartburn. This is just an associative relationship that we'd be looking at. How might you operationally define heartburn? You all know what it is, right? But you're young and you probably haven't experienced it much. Could you just ask, how's your heartburn? Yeah. Are there behaviors that people do that would be different if they've got high heartburn and low heartburn? taking antacids, so we could just look at how many Tums you take in a day. We could look at their eating habits. So we could observe, we could either define that as observing behaviors, or we could define that as a self-report. Did we say that Facebook was continuous or categorical? So we've kind of gone from low to high, right? Is that continuous or categorical? That's pretty continuous, isn't it? How about GPA? Did we say that was continuous or categorical? How about texting? Did we say that was continuous or categorical? How about spelling? Did we say that was continuous or categorical? Okay, so we've defined all of these as continuous, haven't we? We've conceptualized them all as continuous. But it doesn't only work with continuous. Let's think about with the Facebook one. Would there be logical categories of Facebook use? So there could be a none group, right? It could exist, right? Okay, so none. And then we could say, how about if we even go before that, not daily? I don't check it daily. And then you're saying about 2 hours a day, so less than 2 hours a day, and then more than 2 hours a day. So we've now got groups. Which group do you fall into? Are they mutually exclusive? You either fall in one or the other. And then we could do your GPA, and that's going to stay pretty much, on that continuous. What would this look like then? It's no longer going to look like a scatter plot with a line, but what would we predict? What's the average score for the none? What would you predict the average GPA for the none group is? So quite high, yeah? And so if this is the true relationship, we would predict a pattern of results, something like that, right? And you see how that's the same pattern, but we're displaying it with continuous variables, with a continuous predictor variable in that case. So we're going to be talking about these different associated or claims, relationships between variables. Yes? So when we first drew them, we drew all of them as continuous, the predictors and the outcomes as continuous. But then we said, of course, we could group those into categories. So this is a categorical predictor variable, but we've left our outcome variable as continuous. Okay? Facebook users get worse grades in college. Is that an associative claim or a causal claim? Associative. We're not manipulating how much Facebook, we're saying how much Facebook you choose to use affects your grades in college. How about with this, texting and IMing and spelling? Does it sound like we've manipulated how much you text or IM? No, that's, again, it's associative. How about mother's heartburn and the hairy newborn? Is that associative or causal? That's associative. So all three of these are examples of just associative claims where we're just observing two variables and asking the question, is there a relationship between these two? Moving along from associative claims, we want to determine causation. So if we just observe a relationship, that does not mean that one caused the other. And everyone read this with me. Correlation does not imply causation. So just knowing that there is a relationship between two variables does not imply that there is a causal relationship. We are going to spend a huge amount of time thinking about this. I'll let you in on a secret. all of the critical thinking examples that I'm going to give you are falling into this problem. I think all of them. I think every single one. That they are implying a causal relationship from correlational findings. And that's what we're practicing with those critical thinking. So another hint, all of the critical thinking examples I give you should not be believable. Okay? You got it? So you should be, when we do the critical thinking practice, we are practicing picking apart why this is just correlational and not causation. And then, in contrast, we will start looking at really elegant published research where they have determined causation and they've done it perfectly, and we will be able to marvel at how elegantly it is designed and how well they have measured their variables and established their relationship. So when we're moving towards determining causation, we need to keep in mind that just because two variables are related does not mean that they are in a causal relationship. So class attendance and grade are correlated, but that doesn't mean that attending class causes good grades. Ice cream consumption and crime are correlated. They show a strong positive correlation. Because whenever you eat ice cream, you want to go rob a bank. Because whenever you've robbed a bank, you celebrate at Ben and Jerry's. What? I mean, why would those be two? Why would those show a relationship? Yeah. Is it in the summertime that they are both directly influenced by a different variable, temperature? When it's hot, we eat more ice cream. When it's hot, we're animals, we get more aggressive, more crimes are committed. And that they aren't, they are not directly related to each other at all, yet they show this relationship. You've seen this before. To establish a cause and effect, they've both either got to co-occur or not occur. That there's got to be a time sequence. The cause has to come before the effect. And you have to rule out everything else. And this is where the real details are in trying to rule out everything else. So if I told you all mass murderers drank milk as children, I wonder if drinking milk as a child causes you to be a mass murderer. Which of these is it falling down on? So we haven't ruled out alternative causes, but even before that. So thinking about they either both occur or they neither occur. That would have to be, if you drink milk, you become a mass murderer. And if you don't become a mass murderer, you didn't drink milk. And that's not the case, right? Because, everyone pretty much drinks milk as a child, and then not everyone becomes a mass murderer. So that would be they either both occur or neither occur. Do you see how you're seeing that? And then one coming first. Ruling out the alternative causes. This is what we're practicing with our critical thinking, is generating alternative explanations and then trying to rule them out. And we'll spend a huge amount of time doing this. So here are some, I just want to draw your attention, this is in your book, and it's verb phrases that are different between association claims and causal claims. So if we have found an association, here are the ways that we can describe it. We can say they go with, they predict, they're associated with. And what you really want to make sure is that you aren't slipping into causal verbs when you've only got an association claim. And that's a lot of, that was what the fruit of the loom thing was saying, right? It was saying, tuck in your shirt and you'll be happier. Could it be this easy? They were trying to lead you to a causal conclusion. So verbs that go with causal claims reduces or increases or leads to or changes. So just to keep those separate, to make sure that you are not implying a causal relationship when you only have an associative relationship. So just to separate when we're looking at associative claims, when we're looking at associative claims, we're doing correlational research. We are measuring two variables and seeing if there is a relationship between them. When we are doing experimental research, we've got one manipulated variable, that independent variable, and we're measuring the effect on the outcome variable, the dependent variable, and we are searching for causation. So here's an observational example. I wonder if where someone is sitting in the classroom is related to how much they fidget. I could take 300 of my favorite undergraduates and train you to observe fidgeting behavior. So let's generate, what's the definition of fidgeting behavior? So maybe hair twirling or toe tapping, leg shaking. So do you feel like you could observe fidgeting? You could say, yes, no, someone is fidgeting right now? You feel like you could do that? Okay. So what I want you to do, and I want you to do something that's maybe a little bit that you might find that you would be questioning whether you would be able to answer it correctly, but I have confidence because you're highly trained research assistants now. So right now, please observe your own behavior. Are you fidgeting? Yes, no. So go ahead and answer that question. All right, great. So I'm getting a group of people who are saying, yes, right now I am fidgeting, and a group of people saying, no, right now I am not fidgeting. Was that self-report or observation? Did I ask you if you feel like you're fidgeting, or did I ask you to observe your behavior? I trained you guys. I trained you to observe. Now, you're recording your own behavior, and that might be noisy. I might get cleaner information if I had someone else observe your behavior. But we can observe our own behavior. We could note down I wasn't asking, do you remember if you fidgeted 10 minutes ago? If I'd asked you, do you remember if you fidgeted 10 minutes ago, or do you feel like you often fidget? Those would be self-report. But are you fidgeting right now when I've given you an operational definition and I've trained you to observe? You can observe your own behavior, okay? I could then ask you, where are you sitting? And again, you could observe your own behavior and respond. And I see you all responding there. And then we would be able to look at a number of different claims. Let's move on and look at those. So I could assess a frequency claim with just one variable. I could just say how many students were fidgeting right then. There was about half of you said, yeah, I'm fidgeting right now. I can assess an association claim. I could say, do students who sit in the front of the room fidget less than students who sit in the back of the room? I could look at the relative levels of fidgeting in the 3 zones of the room. I cannot assess a causal claim. I cannot assess a causal claim because I didn't start with equal groups. Those of you sitting in the front of the room are different from those of you who choose to sit in the back of the room, right? So then, the groups are not equal to begin with. And I didn't manipulate anything. I didn't make you sit in one area or another. And I might find that this was the data, that this is the average fidgeting in the different zones. How about a self-report example? Hey, look, it's a self-report example. I wonder if gender identity is related to feeling anxious. So I could ask you, what is your gender identity? No, sorry, I could ask you, how much anxiety are you feeling? On, low to high, how are you feeling? Do you see that self-report? That you're just there's no right answer. You're just telling me how you feel. And then I could also ask you, what is your gender identity? And so I could gather that information. And then I could say, let's have a look at the 3 claims. So there's a frequency claim. Overall, how anxious did you report feeling? What was the distribution of that anxiety level? I can assess an association claim. Do men report feeling less anxious than other genders? We could ask. We could look at if there's a relationship between gender identity and anxiety. We cannot assess a causal claim. These are just that we did not start with equal groups, and we haven't manipulated anything. This is a participant variable. So those were 2 examples of correlational research. Here's an example of experimental research. Here's the general outline of what experimental research means. You need to start with 2 equal groups. So now, that was really easy. This is really easy if you're in like chemistry, right? Where 2 equal groups is you just take, I told you about my Nicky and his water and how much salt dissolves and whether the temperature changes. So really easy to get 2 equal groups of water to begin with. Not so easy to get 2 equal groups of people or other animals because they come with so many individual differences. But we use random assignment and we say that they are equivalent. So the idea behind all research is you start with equal groups, you hold everything the same. You want to make the experience as identical as you can. You then manipulate the one variable that you're interested in and measure the outcome, observe the outcome. That's as simple as it is. We're going to spend about 2 weeks in the middle of the term making this more complicated and getting into different types of experimental design and fleshing this out. But come back to this. This is as simple as it is. Start with 2 equal groups, keep everything the same except the one variable you're manipulating, and measure the outcome. Let me show it to you in another way. So you start with at least 2 groups, and they are the same to begin with. You then treat them the same except for the one variable that you're manipulating, and then you measure the outcome and you compare the outcome. And if there is a difference, the difference is due to the treatment. That's when we can determine causation. So let's look at some more examples from your book. Those with ADHD do 1 month less work a year. What's the predictor variable? Having ADHD, so ADHD status. How might we define that? Well, how might we measure someone's ADHD status? We could ask them. We could look at a diagnosis. Is that manipulated or measured? Measured, right? We're not assigning you to a different group of ADHD. We can't do that. It's a participant variable. In this case, are we saying that it's continuous or categorical? Very categorical. Yes, no. You've got it or you don't. What's the outcome variable? So, yeah, work done or productivity. And it's, this is where we get to be really creative. This is where social science research is so much more fun than chemistry. Because in chemistry, you don't get to be creative. You measure your variables with thermometers and with rulers and with scales. And, whereas when we want to define work productivity, we get to choose, well, how are we going to define that? How might we define that? So high and low productivity, but how are we going to define how productive you're being? Okay, so maybe we're just going to look at how many hours you are clocked in. And just if you're phoning in and coming in late, or if you're leaving early, or if you take long lunches, we're just going to look at how many hours in a year you are clocked in. And see, that would be one way of estimating work productivity. I love it. But it might be that they're just goofing off. So how else could we define it? Okay, so how many tasks you complete. So if we're looking at a job that's maybe quite sort of straightforward, let's think we're looking at like a production line type job, and we can just look at how many times did you turn that crank? How many times, how many items did you get completed? That would be a really neat way of defining work productivity, wouldn't it? What sort of claim is this? Associative. The predictor variable is measured. It's not manipulated. It's not under our control. How about this claim? Fasting may fend off jet lag. What's the predictor variable? Okay, so you're giving me one level of it, I think. I think you would want to step back and give me more of the umbrella term. I know you've got a lot of practice on this on your homework this week, and sometimes the variable label is written in those sentences, and sometimes it really isn't, and you need to kind of think about it and step back and give us an umbrella term. So it's sort of fasting, yes, no, right? If you are fasting, yes, no. So what might be an umbrella term for that? So eating or food consumption. Yeah, food consumption. That's a really good sort of umbrella term for from low to high, or from none to some to high to lots. Boy, how are we going to operationally define that? What do you think we could do? How could we determine if this claim was true? Okay, so we could just stand at an airport and greet all the people who are coming off a plane and say, how much have you eaten in the last 24 hours? And get an idea from them of what they've been eating over the last 24 hours, and then we'd have to follow them, which could be a little creepy, but that's okay, and then somehow ask them about their jet lag. If we did it that way, what sort of claim would this be? Associative, right? We haven't manipulated anything. We've just asked them, how much food have you eaten? Oh yeah, let's take control of this. All right? I want to make this a causal claim. Can we be in control of how much food you eat? Sure we can. So we're going to recruit 1,000 people, because money is no object in social science research. We're all well funded. We've got a whole research island, right, where we're going to keep people captive on vacation and watch their jet lag. We're going to fly them. So what do we want to keep? So we're going to assign them to whether you are in the high food consumption group or the low food consumption group. What things do we want to keep the same? Say it again? Everything else. Well, what? Like what? Not thinking about the food, but what else do we want to keep constant? The flight time. So we want them on the same plane, really, don't we? Leaving at the same time, going from the same destination from the same departure to the same destination. Okay. So they're on the same plane, and we're giving half of them peanuts, and we're giving the other half no peanuts. Is that going to be happy? Okay. Oh. So how about we have two planes and they're just flying like next to each other? And we've got the fasting plane and the non-fasting plane. But we want to keep we want to keep departure time and the trip duration, and we want to keep all of those things the same when we start thinking about making this a causal claim and bringing this under our control. Are you understanding this discussion of variables and how they work in relationships to each other? Great. Just some things to keep in mind. There's no overall best method. When we conduct research, there's no right answer. Sometimes it's just the question that you've got that tells you how you're going to conduct the research. But often what we do is we engage in multi-methodological replication, where we take the same sort of idea, does fasting fend off jet lag, and we would look at it in all sorts of different ways, and we would adjust our operational definitions, and we would narrow down what are real relationships and what are relationships that we can dismiss. So we replicate our own findings, we replicate each other's findings. Are you aware of the big study that came out this summer of that a whole bunch of social psychology research is not replicatable? Have you heard about this? But we're not worried. We're not at all worried. Okay, we're a little bit worried. That our findings should be able to be replicated. That would give us confidence that they were true. So we tend to replicate our own research and then replicate other people's research and then just adjust the operational definitions or adjust the method. We tend to be quite skeptical as scientists. We need to replicate findings before we accept them as true. We are also very persistent to the point of being downright stubborn, where if we think that this really is the way the world works and we don't find it the first time, we'll go back and say, oh, maybe I just didn't measure my variables precisely enough, and I'll try to replicate it again and again and again and again. And so that interplay between being stubborn and persistent and skeptical. Let's just practice some claims here. If I say reduced class size in elementary school causes better learning, am I making a frequency claim, an associative claim, or a causal claim? Great, I'm seeing most of you there. We almost all agree that it's not a frequency claim, but there's some, let me show you. Some question between whether it's an associative claim or a causal claim. And if we read it again, reduced class size causes better learning. So the idea of if we gave a school district funding and said, reduce your class size, would that affect learning? How about 16% of teens have considered suicide? Great. And 93% of you are recognizing that that's only got one variable. And if it's only got one variable, it's a frequency claim. And then the mother's heartburn means a mother's heartburn means a hairy newborn. And we've talked about that before. And process of elimination, we've already had answer A and C, so it's got to be B. And indeed, that is an associative claim when neither of those are going to be under our control. Of course. Means does not equate to causes in this case. No, it doesn't. But that's, yeah, no, you're right. That is kind of a causal verb, isn't it? We would be more comfortable with is related to or predicts. And that's a good point. How are you doing on the Your Baby Can Read challenge? Do you believe it? Is Aleka there reading that card? Have you generated some alternate explanations? I'm going to move on unless someone says, help me. Okay. Do you have a question? So when we are doing critical thinking exercises, there are 3 big rocks that we look under. We look under, are the groups equal to begin with? So the people who go and buy Your Baby Can Read and sit for 15 minutes a day doing flashcards with their 9-month-olds, are they the same as everyone else? Can you think of specific plausible ways where they would be different? Socioeconomic status, they've got money to burn because they can afford to buy this. They're not worried about where the rent is coming from or putting food on the table. Time spent, they've got time at home with kids. They're not working 60 hours a day. Sure. So maybe the involvement of parenting or the parenting style, that they might have different parenting styles and be more involved or more strict or less likely to be detached. Can we question the outcome? How might we explain that Aleka is indeed touching her foot when she sees this card without accepting that she is reading the word foot? Okay, so Dad, every time he shows her that card and she touches her foot, Dad smiles and pats her on the head and says, "You are so wonderful." And that feels so nice. And so what would that sort of learning be? Conditioned, or just a conditioned response where she's not actually reading that word, she just knows that combination, that pattern means touch your foot. So how would you test that? How would you rule that out? She's already had the reactions, so the training's already happened. How would you test it? Okay, so change the way the card looks, but still have the word foot on it, but in a different size or in a different font, and if she's really reading it, she should be able to read it. But if it's just a conditioned response to that pattern, then she shouldn't be able to read it. Oh, we didn't say how would you rule out like the socioeconomic status. How would you rule that out? Random assignment. You want to start with 2 equal groups. So you would want to say, I would recruit 100 people and randomly assign them, because that socioeconomic status is something you walk through the door with and you can't manipulate it, and so you could just even it out and say, I'm going to randomly assign you to the Your Baby Can Read group and you to the Not Your Baby Can Read group, and you should have roughly the same number of rich people in this group and number of poor people in that group, and it should all even out. Okay? Are we okay with that? Don't get up. Don't go anywhere. We've got work to do. Oh, I suppose it is only 3 minutes, isn't it? That's all right. We can start a little bit. So when we talk about measurement, we've been talking about measuring our variables. We're going to want to make sure that we're measuring them accurately and consistently. Let me just start with that bit right now. So in science, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. You've got to be able to measure these things. Some things can be directly measured. You can count how many times someone taps their foot. You can, measure how sweaty someone's palms are. You can self-report, ask them to tell you about how they're feeling. But some things can't be directly measured. That's okay. What we're going to do is we're going to create a construct that can be measured, and that gives us some indication of this idea, this underlying variable that we're interested in that can't be directly measured. I pronounce that word construct. I put the emphasis on the first syllable. Now, I'm aware that I have an accent, and actually students in the past have thought that that was part of my accent, was to mispronounce the word construct. You probably read it to begin with as construct. That's a far more familiar use of that combination of letters, right? Construct is the verb. It means to build. We use the same string of letters, but we change the emphasis. And a construct is a noun, and it's something that was built. So they go together. So we're going to invent something. We're going to construct something. We're going to create a construct that can be measured, that will approximate that variable of interest. So we are interested in this hypothetical variable, which is not directly observable, like intelligence or happiness, these things that we were joking in office hours, that I don't have a thermometer that I could jab into your forehead and read off how intelligent you are, or read off how happy you are. And so we have to invent ways of measuring those. So we estimate them by measuring variables that are related, by asking questions that are related, or observing behaviors that are related. All right, go away. I will see you on Thursday, and we'll continue with construct.